As textile students, one of the things that you may well want to do is to visualize the idea of your textile design on a garment. We can do that quite simply in Photoshop, and I'm going to explain some of the processes that you can use. So let's open up some documents first of all. So I've got some things stored onto my desktop, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this photograph which I found off the internet of some textile samples. I'm also going to open this image which I've got off the ASOS website. Somebody's wearing a jumper, and I'm going to open a digital design which I made some time ago, just using simple block repeat patterns in Photoshop. Okay, so one of the first problems that you can encounter is the size of each of your images. Let's look for the moment at image size. So if you look here, this image is 14 centimeters by 14 centimeters at 300 dpi. If we go to this particular person wearing a cardigan, if we go image size, you can see that this image size again is 14 centimeters high by 17 centimeters across. If we go to this textile and then we go image size, you can see this is only 5 centimeters high. So obviously if you've taken images off the internet, the resolution of those images, the size of those images might be very small. If you take your own digital photographs, then you might find that the photographs are absolutely vast. Okay, so in Photoshop we've got these different tabs, and these are the 3 different documents we've just looked at. What I want to do for the moment is I want to take one of these textile samples and apply that to the person wearing a jumper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a selection, copy that, come back to here and paste. Now in the paste option, what I've immediately done is I've pasted that textile on top of the garment, and it's been pasted to the size that the actual image is. So if you're pasting a really large image, so I'll show you that with this one. If I open this up, if I select all of that, if I copy that, if I come back to here and I go paste, then you can see that we've pretty much covered up the whole image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the magnifying glass for the moment, hit the Alt key and start to make that sample a bit smaller. I'm now going to hit Command T, which is the transform tool, and you can see that outside of that image size my textile is much larger. If I hold the Shift key down, go to the corner and push that textile in, I can begin to make that smaller. I'm going to apply the transformation. Now what you have to be aware of is that if you're taking a bigger image and you're making that bigger image smaller, then you're doing that by losing resolution. So this image now is no longer the same sort of resolution that it was. Okay, so I've got this textile here at this sort of scale, and obviously what you might want to think about is the relationship of the scale to the person who's wearing it. So I'm going to hit Command and T again, and what I'm going to now visualize is the idea of how big do I think that textile would actually be in relationship to the figure. Obviously the resolution of this image is going to be low resolution, so it would be much better if I started with a higher resolution of this person. So ideally it would be better if I took my own photograph. I'm going to go to Windows for the moment. I'm going to open up my layers option. So what you can see now is that this textile, this printed textile, is on this layer, whereas this layer over here is a separate layer. So first of all I need to apply my transformation. So I've now made that textile this scale. Over here I'm going to hit Command and T, and I'm going to transfer the scale of this, again thinking about it of how big that textile would be in relationship to this jumper. Once I'm happy with the scale of that, again I need to apply the transformation. Now what I'm going to do, again you can see the resolution of this image, if we start to come in here, is now becoming really pixelated because it started off as being quite a small image in the first instance, but for this demonstration this will kind of do the job. What I'm going to do at this point in time is I'm going to now take these images out of this to create a separate document. So the way to do that is in this layer I'm going to go load selection. So load selection is a way of grabbing that part of the layer, the selection that's in that particular layer. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to hit Command N for new, and my clipboard will be based absolutely on the scale of my selection, and then go paste. Okay, so I've now pasted that textile into a separate document. As we can see, the resolution is poor. I'm going to crop that now so that I just see the textile fabric. Okay, and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the Edit menu, and I'm going to go Define Pattern. And that's now going to go into my Patterns palette. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my Open document, which always takes me a while to remember whereabouts it is. And I'm going to do the same thing with this textile. So I'm not going to crop. I'm going to be in this layer. I'm going to go Load Selection. So now that we're in that layer, we've selected that particular textile. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go New again. Again, the clipboard will be the size of my textile. And I'm going to go Paste. And then I'm going to go back to the Edit menu and Define Pattern. So each time we do this, you can see that the pattern comes up with a different number. You could actually give each one of these your own title so that you know what pattern you've created. Okay, so now that I've created these samples to the right scale in relationship to the figure, I no longer need those layers. So I'm going to delete that particular layer, and I'm going to delete that particular layer. Okay, and I'm going to deselect by hitting Command and D. So really what I want to be able to do now is I want to be able to apply this textile to this jumper. So what I need to be able to do is to make a kind of hole in this photographic image. So there's lots of different ways of doing the same thing, but for the moment the easiest option would be to look at the image and think about it in terms of potentially turning this one image into a series of separate layers. So the easiest thing to do, as this figure is against a white background, is I'm going to use the Magic Wand tool. So you can see the Magic Wand tool is over here. The Magic Wand tool works on a very simple principle. Basically, if I click on here, what it's selecting at the moment are pixels which are the same colour and variations of colour within 32 pixels. So you'll note that the great majority of the background has been selected, but you'll also note that some of the coloration of this nose is the same coloration as here. That's also been selected, and the reason for that it's been selected as well is that the contiguous box has been unchecked. I'm going to deselect for the moment by hitting Command and D. I'm now going to press the contiguous button. When I now click this area, you can see that this left-hand side of the figure has been selected, and you'll also note that because the top section of this image is also continuous, the other side has been selected as well. So at the moment I've selected the background. Now I've got a number of options, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that background, and I'm now going to paste that background. So what that means is I've now got a sort of blank background. If I switch that figure off, you can see I've got a blank background. What I'd like to be able to do is I'd like to be able to select this head and the hands separately. So what I'm going to do now, remember I must be in the right layer to make this selection. I'm going to go from the Magic Wand tool to the Quick Selection tool. Now what I can now do is start to hover over that area. Okay, and I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste that. So what I've now created is a separate head. Coming back to this background layer again, I'm going to go to the Quick Selection tool again. I'm going to select this, and as you can see, when we're using the Quick Selection tool, we've got a number of options. So if I click the Add button, I can also select that hand as well. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste that. So what that's now given me is it's given me a white background, a separate head, a separate hands, and the original image as a separate layer. I'm now going to add a blank layer. So what I'm now going to do is I'm now going to apply my textile. So I'm going to use the paint bucket tool, and when we've got the paint bucket tool, normally we have foreground colour selected, which means that we're going to paste this particular colour into the image. So if I go foreground and I go paste, you can now see that I've completely filled that whole area with colour. Of course, I filled it at the moment with a solid colour, but as that's a separate layer, I could change the opacity of that layer, and we'll start to see obviously the jumper through that layer. I don't actually want to fill that particular area with a solid colour, so I'm going to select everything in that layer and I'm going to hit delete, so I'm now deleting it. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to pattern, and then I'm going to look here to see my pattern options, and that textile I created is now going to be pasted. Now what you can see is that that's pasted the whole area, so if I switch off the layers in front of that, you can see that the top layer has been filled. It's been filled to 71%. Obviously if I increase the saturation, increase the opacity, you can see it's now a solid fill. Okay, I've filled the whole area, and the reason I've filled the whole area, in fact I'm going to drop the opacity down a minute because that will be useful. The reason I've filled the whole area is that at the moment that pattern has been applied as a completely flat pattern. And to create more of the illusion of three-dimensionality, I want to wrap that pattern a bit more around the figure. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to go to the Edit menu, I'm going to go to Transform, and I'm going to go to Warp. And what Warp allows me to do is to start sort of bending the pattern around the figure. So you can see I can start to give that shape a bit more 3 dimensions. Now of course the pattern is going completely across the figure, so at this stage what I could do, deselect, is I could start to select an area around the arm. I could copy that, I could paste that, and I could then do the same thing again. Really sort of pulling that shape in to create the illusion of the sleeve. Once I'm happy with that, obviously I can put the rest of the layers back in. And obviously this layer at the moment was semi-transparent, so I made it semi-transparent so that I could see some of the kind of texture of the jumper underneath it. Obviously this layer at the moment is fully opaque, so again I could tweak the opacity of that to give that a bit more roundedness. Now another thing that I could do is I could manipulate the tonal values of the image, and this is where it's quite useful to be conscious of the dodge tool and the burn tool. So the dodge tool tends to lighten an area. So if I'm working on here, I'm starting to lighten ever so slightly some of the exposure values on that jumper. If I go to the burn tool, that slightly darkens the exposure in some of the areas as well, starting to give my jumper a bit more volume. So obviously I could now save that image. As I've said before, the problem with this particular image is that the resolution was quite low anyway. If I was unhappy with that pattern, I could switch this off. I could add a new layer. I could then go back to my paint bucket tool. This time I could select my other pattern and apply that. And again, if I wanted to, I could do exactly the same things before, changing the opacity so we can start seeing the jumper through, changing the tonal values, beginning to warp the design around the figure. But that's very, very simply how one could create the idea of applying a textile to an existing garment.